Hi everyone, welcome to the March 25th edition of the TimeformUS Forecast. I'm David Aragona here with my usual co-host Craig Milkowski, and this week we're looking ahead to the Saturday card at Fairgrounds, really their final big race day of the spring season as they are running the feature race of their meet. It is the Louisiana Derby Grade 2 event, 100 Derby qualifying points on the line for these 3-year-olds, and a unique distance for them to run, 1 mile and 3/16. Most of these final prep races for the Kentucky Derby are run at 9 furlongs. These 3-year-olds will be going 1/16 of a mile farther than that. That is the final race of the day at Fairgrounds, but we'll be talking about the entire late pick 5 sequence, races 8 through 12. It's an all-stakes sequence, beginning with the Tom Benson Memorial, going on through a quartet of Grade 2 events, the New Orleans Classic, the Mervyn Muniz Memorial on the turf, and the Fairgrounds Oaks, which is a prep for the Kentucky Oaks, featuring the much-anticipated return of last year's 2-year-old filly champion, Echo Zulu. So, Craig, it's a pretty interesting sequence in the sense of having some star power, some really nice 3-year-olds in action, though as I went through it, I started to get the sense that it might play out a little bit chalky.
Yeah, this is, last week I was pretty excited about the pick 5 and playing it. This week, not so much. It's one we'll play a few of these races vertically, but if I do play a pick 5 ticket, it will be really narrow, using a few prices and a couple races, but with some chalk and some other ones. So yeah, I don't think it's the greatest pick 5 sequence we're going to talk about this year, but the races are fun to talk about individually.
Now, before we get into the handicapping, just want to do a little bit of housekeeping and mention that Craig and I will be skipping a few of these podcasts over the next week and a half. We both have a couple of vacations coming up. For me, I'll be off all of next week. I know Craig is going to be away for the following weekend and a few days after that. So we're not going to do a Pacecast or Forecast next week, and we're not going to do a Pacecast the week after that. So we'll resume the podcast for the TimeformUS Forecast for that weekend of April 9th. I believe April 9th is a Saturday, so whatever the forecast is before that, we'll record on that Thursday or Friday. So we'll skip, I think, about 3 of these podcasts over the next week and a half or so. So we won't recap these races next week, but I'm sure that, Craig, you'll probably post the speed figures on Twitter.
Oh, for sure. I'm sure. You know me, I'll have plenty to say even when I'm on vacation about the bigger races. We'll definitely be posting the speed figures, as I'll still be doing a few of them. So, and even the ones I don't do, I do the processing. So I never get a true vacation, but it'll be a mostly vacation.
Well, let's dive into the handicapping, and we're going to begin with that one ungraded stakes race in this all-stakes sequence. Race 8, the Tom Benson Memorial, going 1 mile and 1/16 on the turf for the fillies and mares. And Craig, the theme of this race, I think, is horses returning from layoffs, because I think some of the most appealing contenders in this race are all coming off layoffs, making their 2022 debuts. The favorite on the morning line is the number 6, Hendy Woods, and I guess she's kind of the class of this race. She faced some pretty good horses last year, just losing by a half length to Regal Glory in the De La Rose last summer. Comes out of a Grade 1 attempt in the First Lady. That was just too tough for her, and this is an easier spot than that, but she's going to have to show up with a good effort to win this race.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I understand why she was made the favorite. As you said, I think it is a class thing. And even though the Grade 1 was a bit tough for her last time, it just seemed like maybe something didn't go right. She didn't run her best race that day, because she had run some pretty good races last year. Even though, I don't put a whole lot of stock in that Kentucky Downs race, where she got a 121 speed figure. The time before that, she was only beaten a half length by Regal Glory, who's turned out to be really good. I'm not sure if we're going to see her run anymore. She had won that Pegasus Ladies Turf with pretty good speed figures. So, yeah, I would say she's the class of the race. She has some early speed, so if she comes back in top form, I have no problem with her being the horse to beat. She's certainly been working out regular and often. So, I think she is a strong contender in here. And if I do play, she is one I would definitely want to use on my tickets. This is a race where the pace projector is pretty interesting. We didn't get the biggest field, as we didn't get in a lot of these races. I mean, a field of 9 is not terrible by any stretch, but on these big stakes days, we generally deal with bigger ones, and it's a pace projector that just doesn't see a lot of speed, and I don't really have any argument with that. When you look through the running styles, the only horse who's listed even so much as a tracker is the horse, the 9 horse, Lovely Ride. 4-year-old filly who seems to be going in the right direction. I always struggle with these races because she's not really a horse who is proven to be a front runner. She is more of that tracker style. So she's one that I want to use if I knew for sure Florent Geroux was going to take her to the front. I'd be a lot more optimistic, but when you look at her PPs, for me, it gives me a little bit of pause. But if I had to make a top pick in here, it would probably be her, because even if she's not on the front, she's going to be right there, and I don't expect a lot of pace.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think if they're not sending Lovely Ride to the front in this race, they're crazy, because when you look through the rest of the horses in here, I mean, none of them usually get a whiff of the lead. So the fact that she's contesting the pace in her races should make her the clear frontrunner here. And they do have options from the outside post positions, so I'm sure that Florent Geroux coming out of the gate will be kind of craning his head to the left to see who's getting aggressive. I imagine that nobody will be, so you would just figure that he'll inherit the early lead by default. I mean, the only other horse that I could see potentially showing some initiative to the inside outside of that favorite, Hendy Woods, is the number 8, She Can't Sing. She Can't Sing has the speed to be in front based on her dirt races, but given the fact that she ran so well last time coming from off the pace on the turf, you're not going to anticipate that the connections are going to change up that style, so I'd imagine they'd try to rip her back off the pace once again, and it feels like that just leaves Lovely Ride in front. I do believe Lovely Ride is a private purchase since her last race. She was in the barn of Brett Calhoun. Now she's going out for Robertino Diodoro. I don't really think of Diodoro as having a lot of top-level turf horses, so make of that what you will. I looked up his stats in stakes races on the turf over the past 5 years. I mean, it's not a terrible win percentage, but the ROI is under $1 on a $2 wager. He just doesn't get a lot of really high-quality turf horses in his barn, but with Florent Geroux riding, you'd imagine this horse is going to get a good trip that's forwardly placed. I'm not against her. I thought she ran well enough last time, and Past the Plate has obviously done some good things since she beat her by a head in that Marie Krantz Memorial, so I think that she's a contender in this race. The other horse, Craig, that I'd be very interested in is the number 4, Gam's Mission. This is a horse that I liked a little bit last year when she was a 3-year-old. She won that Regret at Churchill Downs when she was really on an upward trajectory. Then they just tried some tough spots in that New York Triple Series at Belmont and Saratoga in the Belmont Oaks. The Saratoga Oaks. In both of those races, I don't think she got ideal trips. She was probably a bit too close to the pace in the Saratoga Oaks in a race that might have been going a little bit too far for her. Same thing in the Belmont Oaks when she was just a little bit wide and out of position the entire way. I thought she actually ran really well last time out in the Winter Memories at Aqueduct. If you watch the start of that race, she stumbles pretty badly coming out of the gate. That put her towards the back of the pack. That race was dominated on the front end by Plum Ali, who just got to basically waltz along through pretty moderate fractions, and Gam's Mission was the only horse that was making up a significant amount of ground from the back of the pack. So I think that she was really improving towards the end of her 3-year-old season. She's got a right to take another step forward now, making her 4-year-old debut. The one caveat with her is that Cherie DeVoe was kind of tempering expectations in the race preview that I read by Marcus Hirsch. I think that she was saying that she doesn't have this horse 100% fit for her 4-year-old debut, and this is just the jumping off point. That's probably just a little bit of trainer speak, but I think it's something that's worth being aware of, because she's not going to get the ideal pace situation here, because she does typically come from farther behind in a race that does not project to feature a whole lot of pace.
Yeah, that was a couple downsides I have with her, and they're not so much horse related, but it's, as you said, that just the lack of speed I think is a problem here. And even that said, I mean, it's a turf race. I don't get too carried away with the projected pace, because oftentimes we see closers are able to win this race anyway. But the real negative for me, I was surprised, was only the 7-2 morning line. I thought her form was maybe a little more hidden than that, and maybe it will become post time. Maybe she won't be 7-2, but I was a little worried about that price. But she certainly fits in here. She has speed figures as good or better than anyone else, and she is that newly turned 4-year-old. So with any improvement, she easily could take these.
Yeah, I guess one more horse that we should mention is the number 1, Lake Lucerne. I can't say that I love her form. She probably was improving towards the end of last year. That allowance race where she beat In a Hurry back in September at Saratoga has come back okay because In a Hurry, I think, was stakes placed after that. Lake Lucerne did pick up a grade 3 placing herself in the Athenia, but that was not the deepest field, to say the least. There wasn't a whole lot behind those that completed the trifecta in there. She does pick up Joel Rosario coming off the layoff for Brendan Walsh, so I don't want to completely dismiss her. I just think she'd have to take a step forward.
Yeah, the one thing I actually tried to make her my top pick based on that good Saratoga race. The one thing really stuck out to me is that she looks like a horse that really wants a firm turf. Her best efforts have come when we've had the course rated pretty high on that 1 to 10 TimeformUS scale, either 8 or 9, and you never get that at the fairgrounds. So that was my big concern, and not just that, the way she tailed off after that big race. She had no excuse in the Athenia whatsoever. As you said, it wasn't the strongest race. Her speed figure regressed. She was right there on a slow pace, and just she seemed to lose form at the end of the year. So Brendan Walsh, he does well off a layoff, so I wouldn't blame anyone for wanting to use her. But for me in this spot, I think there's too many negatives.
Yeah, I don't think they've had that much rain in the New Orleans area this week. I would anticipate that the turf course is going to be firmer, at least, than what we saw on the Risen Star card about 5 weeks ago. And that's going to come into play, I think, more so for the other turf race that we're going to talk about in this sequence. But yeah, Craig, I agree. It's like every option that I wanted to go to in this race is a little bit flawed. I know you're kind of leaning towards Lovely Ride. I'm leaning towards Gam's Mission, but I can't say that I have full confidence in anybody in this race.
Yeah, that's actually totally how I'm looking at this race. I can't get too excited about anybody. There's no big prices that I love in here, and the rest of them, I mean, the morning line's all pretty close together for, I think it's about the top 5 choices. There's that general, half point or 1 point spread, and just none of them excite me. And I've got no reason to question the morning line. I think it's probably pretty solid. So, yeah, just a tough race, and if I were playing the pick 5, this is one I would probably spread a little bit more than some of the others.
Let's move on to the next leg of this sequence, the Grade 2 New Orleans Classic for the older horses going 1 1/8 on the dirt course. And Craig, this race, it feels like it usually attracts a larger field. A lot of horses that contested the Mine Shaft last time on Risen Star Day have decided not to come back and play in this spot, and that just leaves the number 2 Olympiad, who was the Mine Shaft winner, as the likely speed in this race, and it seems like he's going to be a pretty likely winner at a short price.
He does. I was disappointed in this race. I'm sure the people that take the entries at the fairgrounds were probably disappointed in this race. Coming up with just 6 horses, it's a Grade 2 with a $500,000 purse. I was hoping for a little more. And actually, I would probably look for a reason to bet against Olympiad if it wasn't for the pace projector. Because it's not like, he's been good, but it's not like he's been running speed figures through the roof that are unbeatable. There's some horses in here who have run similar, but I just think that pace advantage is going to make him really tough to beat. If I were going to use any others, I mean, I do think you have to give Promise Keeper a look. I remember both you and Emily Gullickson, when she was a guest on our show, really liked that horse in the Razorback. And based on that, I don't see any reason to write him off from that race. He ran a 120 speed figure, which is as good as Olympiad's been running in his. He did have some trouble that day, and he's a horse who has been able to run up close to the pace. So I would say he is the main danger, and maybe the pace projector is missing the boat a little bit on him because of that trouble at the start the last time out. So I would suspect he's going to be the one closest and the main danger. And the other horse that I think you have to at least mention is Chess Chief, who's drawn outside. He doesn't seem to always put a lot of good races together, but the one thing that is no doubt about him is he loves the fairgrounds. He's a horse that's won 5 out of 31 career starts, and all 5 of those wins have come at the fairgrounds in only 10 starts. Hit the board 8 out of 10 times, so I wouldn't totally dismiss him. He does seem to run better, show a little more pace, but as you said, the pace of the race does make Olympiad really tough.
Yeah, I just think it's pretty hard to build a case against Olympiad in this spot. I mean, the thing about Olympiad is he's now tried two-turn distances twice in his career in each of his last two starts, and he's enjoyed slow paces in each of those races. But he's probably going to face a similar situation here, and probably even an even slower pace, because there is just nobody to press him. I agree that Promise Keeper is the one horse in this race that could apply a little bit of pressure, but when you look at the races where he was close to the pace, it's not like they were going that fast up front. I don't even know if he possesses the speed anymore that he showed in that sloppy track maiden win from last February at Gulfstream Park when he did set a somewhat faster pace. It just looks like recently he's been on top of some slower paces, and he was pretty sluggish last time. I know that he had trouble at the start of that Razorback when he did kind of get sandwiched back between horses and steadied out at the gate, but I mean, he was asked along at the back of the pack by Florent Giroux and just had no early speed whatsoever. So I wonder about how much pressure Promise Keeper can really apply. And not that Olympiad is some blazingly fast horse. He's no Life is Good, but he does have natural speed. And it just feels like if Junior Alvarado lets him gallop away from the gate, he's going to have an early advantage on this field. And the thing about Olympiad is when you let him get away with some moderate fractions, you know that he can come home and really sprint to the wire. Maybe the 1.125 distance takes some of that late kick away from him, but I'm not anticipating it's going to be enough to make him particularly vulnerable in this race. So I have trouble building a case against him. I did give a long look to Promise Keeper. I do think it is a feather in Promise Keeper's cap that Rated R Superstar came back to run as well as he did last week in the Essex Stakes coming out of the Razorback, because Promise Keeper and Rated R Superstar did have similar trips in the Razorback. Both were compromised by what seemed to be a pretty moderate pace. Rated R Superstar is just the natural closer, whereas Promise Keeper was probably out of position early due to that slow start. They both came running late. Promise Keeper was arguably moving faster than Rated R Superstar across the wire of the Razorback. So I do think that this horse has the potential to take a step forward for Todd Pletcher. I think that he's working slightly better coming into this race. I liked his drill on March 12th that I watched when he outworked another Pletcher horse who's a stakes winner, First Constitution. He was outworked in his last drill by a Pletcher 3-year-old named Charge It, who was an impressive maiden winner, but as far as I've seen, Charge It's been outworking everything in Todd Pletcher's barn, so I think that's a horse you want to look out for next time he runs, probably in a stakes race or a Derby prep. Yeah, Promise Keeper, he seems like the main danger to me. I just have trouble building a strong enough case for him to take him at, I guess, 3-1, maybe 7-2 at most, when I just believe Olympiad's a much more likely winner. Craig, what do you do with the number 5 Proxy, who does have upside, second off the layoff? He's a horse that people became quite familiar with on this trail last year, running through races like the Lecomte, the Risen Star, the Louisiana Derby. I think for him, it's just a matter of whether he can move forward in his second start as a 4-year-old.
Yeah, I wasn't sure what to do with him. I was a little disappointed in the speed figure. I remember when I watched that race thinking he came back really nice as a 3-year-old, because we hadn't seen him in a while. He had been off since the the Lexington at Keeneland. So, you know, it was every right to take a pretty big jump of 10 points or more, but he basically just ran the same exact speed figure he'd been running as a 3-year-old, and he did it with an ideal pace setup. He did show a new dimension. He hadn't really come from that far back. As a matter of fact, I think a couple of his wins prior had been wire to wire. In this case, he was well off that fast pace, which we even had in red fraction. So, I mean, I'm not totally against him. But as a 5-2 second choice, I mean, I just don't really want any parts of him against a horse like Olympiad. He'd have to improve quite a bit. He'd have to probably be up close to him, which he didn't do the last time. So for me, I would prefer horses. If I was going to play this as a vertical race, I would prefer horses like Chess Chief and Promise Keeper and Exactas to him.
Yeah, we're pretty much on the same page about that. If indeed Proxy is going off around a co-second choice in this race, I do believe that Promise Keeper is the much more likely winner and that Chess Chief is a more interesting long shot, so we're pretty much in agreement there. Let's move on to race 10, the other turf race in this pick 5 sequence. It is the Grade 2 Mervyn Muniz Memorial, going 1.125 miles on the turf course at Fairgrounds. And Craig, we've got a couple of Chad Brown trainees that could be pretty tough in here, both drawn down towards the inside in the number 2 Sacred Life and the number 3 Devamani. Whenever Chad Brown ships in to a race like this, I think you have to pay attention, and he's got a couple of horses that I think fit this race pretty well. The big question here, I believe, for both of his horses is how much pace are they going to get ahead of them? Probably more pace than we'll see in the other turf race that's part of this sequence, as there are a few that can be forwardly placed in this spot.
Yeah, for sure. I of the 2 Chad Browns, I do much prefer Sacred Life to Devamani personally. I'll be interested to hear your take on that. I think he's a little bit better horse. Devamani, he's had his spots, but his wins have come in much weaker spots, if you ask me. His speed figures are a little bit less, so I do prefer Sacred Life to him. But there is a horse I'm interested in at a price in here, and it kind of goes back to what you were talking about earlier, the condition of the course we're talking about. And a lot of horses are coming out of that Fairground Stakes, so I think it's a good starting point is to talk about that race. And that ground was listed as firm that day, which frankly is a bit of a joke. There is no way that course was firm. It was borderline soft. I mean, if you wanted to say yielding, I wouldn't argue with you much, but it's a day when I'm not going to take the results too seriously. Normally, I would look at this, see a horse like Cavalry Charge, who set really fast fractions, was able to hold on and win. And don't get me wrong, he did run a big race. He got a 120 speed figure, but as you said, they haven't had a lot of rain recently. And though the Fairgrounds course is never going to be a course that's a 9 or a 10, being in New Orleans with that low water table, it just doesn't happen there. For me, I think that race is one I'm just not going to pay a whole lot of attention to. I'm going to throw the results out. And the horse that interests me, and it goes back to when we had Marcus Hirsch as a guest, he kind of pointed out that he thought this was the race 2 Emmys was pointing to. That was 2 races ago. I think his form really got dirtied up last time when he pressed that really fast pace. He was drawn far outside, so he didn't have a lot of choice. The one concern is that I think he does need to rate off the pace a little bit, but he has done that, and maybe that last race will do it. And the 15-1 morning line just really jumped out at me. I think he's a horse who is a lot better than that last race shows. I think this has probably been the goal all winter, so he's the one I'm going to take a shot with to pull the upset. Now, I'm not saying we're going to get 15-1. I don't believe that, but 8-1 would be fine for me.
Yeah, I would have trouble believing that 2 Emmys is going to be the second biggest price in this race. He just has too many races that make him super tough against this field. We agree quite a bit in here, Craig. I echo everything you say about that Fairground Stakes from last time and the condition of the turf course on Risen Star Day. And when you look at 2 Emmys PPs, it kind of shows how not accurately rating the turf course can kind of mess with the minds of handicappers a little bit, because you might look at 2 Emmys' last 5 or so races and say, this horse loves giving the ground because he ran his best races over a good course, and then last time he got on a firm course and didn't run well. Well, I would say actually the opposite is true, because this horse was running over much firmer turf courses last year, particularly on Arlington Million, or I should say Mr. D Day at Arlington Park in the Sycamore at Keeneland last year, when the turf course was rated an 8 out of 10, and the turf was rated good. And last time he got on that 5 rated turf course out of 10, and as you said, that's probably yielding or soft by the American scale. So it's very possible that 2 Emmys just did not handle the softer ground last time. And I also look at a horse like 40 Under coming out of that same race, who just put in an inexplicably poor performance attending that fast pace that was set by Cavalry Charge. And speaking of the turf condition, I think you can make the argument that Cavalry Charge is just a horse that moves way up when the turf is on the yielding side, because his other really big effort in recent times came in that race at Keeneland back in October, when he got a course rated 6 that was accurately rated yielding at Keeneland, and he was able to win with a 117 TimeformUS speed figure, clearly the second best number of his career. So maybe the given the ground is what moves up Cavalry Charge. And just in general, I don't want to take horses that I did not have last time when they win at 35-1 and come back at a much shorter price. So he's not for me. 2 Emmys would be the one for me coming out of the Fairgrounds. The other horse coming out of the Fairground Stakes that I do think deserves a big look in here, Craig, is the horse on the outside, Santine. He was kind of the international good thing that day, as he, I believe, was a crazy price on the morning line and unsurprisingly got bet down, but probably got bet down too much to be the 5-2 favorite. I thought Santine, though, ran pretty well. He never looked like he was totally getting over the course. He didn't pick up with the same turn of foot that we've seen from him in some prior races, but he never gave up in that race, and he was still trying across the line. And I believe this horse does have more upside, and you might get a better price on him today than you did last time.
Yeah, I was interested in him as well. He's one I will certainly use if I did play a pick 5, and we'll definitely use in verticals with 2 Emmys along with Sacred Life. Not really a whole lot to add. He did get overbet. It was crazy last time. We both knew the morning line was silly. I don't remember what it was, but it seemed like the bettors just were going to a fire sale and couldn't get enough of them. And he ran decently, but it was a good setup. But as I say, I'm going to look more at his prior races because that course doesn't resemble what we had seen from his other races. But he's one that adapted. I mean, he ran fine. He matched his career best speed figure, and he's certainly a strong contender for me in here. As for Sacred Life and Devamani, do you have a preference of those two between those two?
Yeah, I mean, as for the 2 Chad Brown runners, we kind of agree. I do prefer Sacred Life as well. Not that I'm saying anything too clever there. I would imagine he'll be the shorter price. It just seems like he's got the stronger form coming into this race. The one note that I would make about him is, while he's never raced at the fairgrounds before, he does seem like a horse that it should be predisposed to like the fairgrounds configuration, because he's the kind of closer that just seems like you can't ever find a stretch that's long enough for him. He's a really strong finisher that tends to run out of ground at times. That was certainly the case last time with the Pegasus World Cup turf at Gulfstream, when, I mean, Gulfstream is just not the kind of course for any closer, on the turf at least. And Sacred Life was just at the back of the pack the entire way. Probably had more horse, but was finishing too late with down the center of the racetrack. That was not a race that featured a particularly fast pace. I don't think there are any published fractions for that race, and there are no pace figures in the TimeformUS PPs. But just visually, it didn't seem like a race that featured a particularly strong pace up front. So I thought that Sacred Life ran well to split the field there, and I just think he makes a lot of sense. And I wouldn't put too much into the fact that Florent Giroux is riding this horse for Chad Brown. There are a lot of riders that are out of the country on Saturday due to the Dubai World Cup card that's taking place. So I think Chad Brown has to go deeper in the bench than what he usually would to get a rider for some of his top horses. So Sacred Life to me just makes a ton of sense. But I'm endorsing a horse that I believe is going to be the favorite. So at bigger prices, I would be just as interested in Santine and also 2 Emmys, who you highlighted. I think maybe, Craig, you're a bit more confident in 2 Emmys than I am, but if he's going to be even in that 8 to 10 to 1 range, I think that's fair value on him.
Yeah, that's what I mean. If you had to say who was the most likely winner, I wouldn't say he is close to that, but I would say he's probably the second or third most likely winner in my opinion, and is going to be a much bigger price. As for that Pegasus, you're right, there are no pace figures. I don't remember the exact circumstances, but I know I tried, and there was just no way I could come up with any confident numbers. There was no markings on the turf course at the time. Just no way. It was a new turf course, a new distance on that course, so just not much I could do about that. Disappointing, but you guys out there know I try. When possible, I'll have figures.
Yeah, and I don't want to completely dismiss Devamani. I've just never been the biggest fan of this horse. I know he's got some 120 plus TimeformUS speed figures, some triple-digit buyers that would put him in the mix here. But I don't know. I didn't like his last race at Tampa Bay Downs. I just thought he really had no punch. That was a race that didn't feature the strongest pace, and some horses who were up close early did end up doing well, so maybe he just got too far back that day. But he's 8 years old now. I wonder if he's just losing a step. Maybe it means something that Joel Rosario is riding him instead of Sacred Life, but I did prefer the form of Sacred Life. Let's move on to race 11, the Grade 2 Fairgrounds Oaks, the final Fairgrounds prep for the Kentucky Oaks. And Craig, this one features the much anticipated return of last year's 2-year-old filly champion Echo Zulu. Undefeated and really untested in 4 career starts, as she was much the best in all of her appearances last year. But for me, her presence makes this a really difficult pick 5 sequence to play, because she's going to be a very heavy favorite, probably about 1-5 in this race, just given the pace situation and the lack of worthy competition. And these are not the types of horses that I like to rely on at extremely short prices, and I know that you feel the same way, Craig.
Yeah, I was going to say, now we enter the boring portion of the program, because I just don't think there's a lot to say. People out there know neither one of us are averse to hunting out some longer prices and trying to beat heavy favorites, but I just wouldn't even know where to start in here. We don't have a single horse, I don't think, that's ever hit the triple-digit mark on our speed figures. Whereas Echo Zulu has run a 114 the last time, has run a 112 in the past, and has never not hit the triple digits. I guess there would be some concern. She hasn't run since November, but in this case, that was the plan all along. She came back. She's been working since February. She hasn't missed a week. So I just don't see beating her in here. I think if you're playing against her, you're just trying to get lucky and hoping she doesn't show up. She's not the horse she was last year, but I haven't seen anything in the workouts that I've seen that would indicate that. She looks good. She's on schedule, so yeah, I'm going to watch this race, and as you said, I think she does kind of wreck. When some of the other legs I think are going to be kind of chalky too, she makes it almost unplayable, so nothing too clever for me in this one.
No, I mean, I've entertained some of the thoughts and theories that have been put out there about why she might be vulnerable in this race. I've seen some people go to the breeding and say that we haven't seen the gun runners do quite as well since they've turned 3 as they did as 2-year-olds. I mean, Gun Runner had such an amazing year as a freshman sire with his juvenile runners, multiple graded stakes wins, and if you just look at the stats in DRF Formulator, his progeny won overall at a 23% rate, which is just off the charts. As 3-year-olds so far, the rate is down to just 11%, but it's a much smaller sample, and probably a lot of the best gun runners have not targeted the big races just yet. I mean, just look at Echo Zulu. She hasn't even made a start yet so far in her 3-year-old season. And on the dam side, yes, it's true. It's more sprint pedigree than it is route pedigree. But she handled the mile in the 16th last year, so I think it's grasping at straws a little bit to make the pedigree the big reason why she's not going to show up here. It is a late start to her season. I think for the Kentucky Oaks, it typically works a little bit differently than the Kentucky Derby. We've seen in recent years, these 3-year-old fillies, they don't need to compile this big body of work as a 3-year-old before trying the Oaks like we've been accustomed to with the Colts for the Derby horses. We saw Malathot come back off just 1 prep last year to win the Oaks, so I don't think it's a big deal that she's just getting in 1 prep before trying the Kentucky Oaks. And as for the workouts, we don't really have any reputable workout report that I've seen from the fairgrounds to say how she's been training, but I am getting the vibe that it feels like that she's doing okay. The workout times on the face of things seem like they've been trying to get her fit. If you remember last year, she was a horse that never worked particularly fast. She was kind of known as one that was not flashy at all in the mornings. So if she's doing remotely well, that's a good sign coming into this 3-year-old debut. And from a pace standpoint, she's supposed to be completely loose in this race. Look, I love to pick against horses like this because I think if she's going to be vulnerable, this is the spot where she's the most vulnerable in, because we have not seen her yet as a 3-year-old, and sometimes these horses that are so precocious as juveniles just don't go on next year. I just can't latch on to any of these alternatives as being a standout or good enough to cause the upset here. So I just don't have a whole lot to say about this race from a multi-race sequence, Craig.
No, and even from a vertical standpoint, I don't even know which direction I'd go if I was looking to play an exacta. We've talked about a few times in our races, I've never been a big Hidden Connection fan, and she's probably going to be the second choice. But basically all the other horses in here have run pretty much the same speed figures. They're all listed around the same on the morning line. There's no real separation there. So, yeah, for me, I'm just going to be watching this race as a fan.
Yeah, we should mention just a couple of others. If there were 2 horses that I would say are most dangerous to cause an upset, which I think is a bit of a stretch, but I would say they're the number 3 Favor and the number 4 Burna Breezy, and I'll just highlight them because they're 2 of the bigger prices on the morning line. I mean, look, Favor has beaten awful fields at Gulfstream. The 3-year-olds in some of the allowance and maiden races at Gulfstream this winter have just not been up to the quality that we've seen in recent years. And you could look through the running lines of her last 2 races in the charts. Not the strongest groups, but she was visually impressive winning those races. I know this was a horse that they liked a lot before her debut. When she ran at Aqueduct, she was bet down to favoritism that day. She's got a big pedigree to get better as the distances get longer, being by Pioneer of the Nile. Her dam is a full sister to Cross Traffic, who was a very good horse for Todd Pletcher a number of years ago. I want to say won the Whitney or the Woodward, one of those races. I think Favor is one with upside, and the other one, Burn a Breezy, just a horse that I think did not get the best pace set up in the Silver Bullet Day 2 back, and she is clearly one that enjoys that long stretch at the fairgrounds. She's got a big turn of foot and a late run on her. There's no pace in this race, so it's hard for me to really strongly endorse a horse like her. And Echo Zulu just has such a class edge over a runner like Favor, so I don't want to give too strong a push on either of them, but they're the 2 that I would view as the biggest upset threats.
Yeah, that's not a whole lot to add to that one. And, sometimes it's okay not to bet a race, and that's what I'm going to do here.
Let's close things out with the Louisiana Derby, the feature race on this fairgrounds card. Grade 2 event, as I said at the top of the show, going that 1 3/16 distance, which we don't often see the 3-year-olds try before the Kentucky Derby. From a speed figure standpoint, Craig, I know this one's a bit of a headache for you because fairgrounds almost never runs this distance, so there's not that much to compare it to, but you'll deal with that probably early next week or later this weekend. From a handicapping standpoint, the big favorite is going to be the number 6 Epicenter, who was such a visually impressive winner when he won the Risen Star last time. And, Craig, this was one that I had emailed you about earlier in the week with regard to the pace projector and how this race is going to shake out tactically on the front end. The pace projector is predicting a fast pace, but when I look at it, I see Epicenter as just clearly the fastest horse early, and I'm not going to view this as a pace that's likely to heat up because I don't know who's going to make him run faster than he had to last time.
Yeah, and I agree with you. It's something I'm working on behind the scenes. As a matter of fact, I'll email you about that. I don't want to bore people too much. But with these 3-year-olds, oftentimes their running styles are in flux. And we get a lot of horses listed as trackers. A lot of them have been running in sprints. So that's something I'm going to work on. Because I agree with you. I don't think this race projects to have a fast pace. Some of it, a little bit of it's because of the field size. I think that was the tipping point when I sat down and did the math. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been. But even without that, it's hard to see anybody running early with Epicenter. He's just a fast horse. He didn't have to show it so much last time in the Risen Star, where he ran a pretty even race, but the time before that in the Lecomte, at the shorter distance, there was more speed, and he was still able to outrun him. Now, he did get caught that day by Call Me Midnight, who was in this field, and I mean, I guess I couldn't blame people for maybe thinking he could do it again, but as I said, for me, these last couple were the boring parts, and I just think Epicenter is going to be really tough to run down in here.
Yeah, I frankly do not have a whole lot to add to that. Even though we both liked Call Me Midnight at 28-1 in the Lecomte, I think we're in agreement that Epicenter ran the better race that day, and he proved it last time at the Risen Star by coming back and taking advantage of that more moderate pace situation to win so decisively over what was undoubtedly a better field. I don't think that we have rivals like Smile Happy and Zandon in this Louisiana Derby. I actually think that Epicenter is taking a slight dropping class, and if you look at the TimeformUS race ratings, they completely agree. It was a 113 race rating last time in the Risen Star, and the projected race rating for this Louisiana Derby is just a 109, which frankly is not that high for a final round Kentucky Derby prep. Based on the way that this horse has finished his last couple of races and pedigree, I don't view him as having a major issue with the 1 3/16. I'm not really factoring that added distance too much into my handicapping here. He just looks like a very likely winner. And frankly, I put out a poll earlier this week where I said, who's more likely to win, Echo Zulu or Epicenter? And the obvious answer is Echo Zulu, I think. I mean, she's going to be a much shorter price on the tote board, I would imagine. And the competition in her race is kind of, laughable compared to this. I mean, there's really not a horse that's kind of earned a speed figure in the same realm as her. She's I would imagine she's a TimeformUS and a Bayer Omnifig in that Fairgrounds Oaks. But I do think that Epicenter is not that far off. I view him as a very likely winner of this race, just given the way the tactics are likely to shake out. And I'm not trying to beat him here.
Yeah, I guess we should talk about a couple other horses. We briefly mentioned Call Me Midnight. I'm with you. I know we both liked him last time. He got the perfect setup. He won in a head bob. Gets a little more distance here, another furlong actually, but I just don't see that same scenario developing that we saw there. And I'm not even convinced that just because he's a closer, I'm not sure that extra furlong is really something that he's going to like based on his breeding. So, they say if you didn't go to the wedding, don't go to the funeral. Well, we went to the wedding, but I still don't want to go to the funeral. I really don't like him at all in here. I guess the new guy in here is Zozos. He's probably going to wind up being the second choice, I would think, despite what the morning line says. Yeah, he comes in off two nice wins, especially the second one where he won that big allowance race at Oaklawn Park by over 10 lengths. He only got a 99 TimeformUS speed figure. It was a 104 final time figure, but frankly, I just don't think that was a very strong race. When you scroll through the chart, I know that we all see it came back and ran a really big race to win an allowance race at the fairgrounds, got a 106 speed figure that day. But the rest of the field hasn't proven to be very strong. The 2 and 3 finishers, the 5th place finisher, have all come back and improved their speed figure a little bit while not running particularly well. As a matter of fact, I think they all ran back in the same race and finished 3rd, 4th, and 5th. But that's to be expected because it was a really slow pace that day, and this just seems like too big of a jump up for me for Zozos. I know Brad Cox likes them. He's obviously got some talent, but these are the horses I generally try to beat in these really late preps. It seems like he's being rushed. He just got to the races in January. He's only run twice, and I just think he's going to be a bit over his head facing the kind of speed we see from Epicenter. I guess the other horse I'd want to talk about, and one I would like a little bit more if I'm playing verticals, would be drawn outside as Rattle and Roll. And mostly that's just because I think it was a horrible spot for him last time in the Fountain of Youth. That mile and the 16th distance is just it's like the opposite of what you'd want for a horse like Rattle and Roll. It was his first off a long layoff. It had been, I think, nearly 6 months coming into, at least 5 months, since he had won the Breeders' Futurity. So if there was one horse I was going to give an excuse, think he could be running late in here, not necessarily to catch Epicenter, but to get into that second position, it would be Rattle and Roll.
Yeah, I'm not going to elaborate too much on what you just said, Craig, because we pretty much agree with all of that. Zozos, I think, is going to be the second choice in this race. The speed figure for his last probably could be elevated a little bit, I would say. Enough horses have run back out of that race to improve, but like you said, it was a slow pace. He was right on top of the slow pace. And I have some questions about him handling the added distance. He's by Munnings. He's a half-brother to a horse named Emerald Forest, who is a pretty accomplished sprinter at some lesser circuits. I think he ran one stakes at Churchill Downs last year, but not a lot in this pedigree is saying to me that a mile and 3/16 is going to be the best trip for this horse. So as the second choice, I wanted to look for somebody else. Rattle and Roll, we agree about his form coming into this race. I did not like him at all in the Fountain of Youth. I agree this is a better spot for him. He also had a bit of a trip in the Fountain of Youth, had to alter course multiple times. And I, if you recall, I did not like the way he was training into the Fountain of Youth. I think he's trained a little bit better into this race. His last work was in company with Smile Happy, and he was second best to Smile Happy, but not as decidedly second best as he was in some of his works coming into the Fountain of Youth. So maybe he's doing a little better now. The horse that I actually would like mostly as a backup in here is one of the horses that was behind Epicenter last time, and that's the number 7, Pioneer Medina. And I don't think he's going to be the second choice. I know he's the second choice at 5-1 on the morning line, but I believe he's going to be a bigger price than that. And he just strikes me as a horse that's steadily been improving for Todd Pletcher. I didn't like the races towards the early part of his career at all, but he's just continued to take steps forward with each and every start. And I liked the way that he fought on last time. It looked in mid-stretch like he was just going to get swallowed up for second and third by Smile Happy and Zandon, but once those two ranged up alongside of him, he really battled on to just barely miss in a photo for third. And given his pedigree, I mean, he's bred to run all day. I think that the extra distance is really going to work for him. And if they're not moving that fast up front, he's probably just going to be tracking Epicenter. And while I don't necessarily like him to turn the tables on Epicenter, I think that he could hang on for a big piece of this and potentially complete the exacta. I've watched some of his recent workouts at Palm Beach Downs, and I see a horse that's continuing to move forward. He's just gotten stronger and stronger in his workouts, and I think he's coming into this race in good form. So for me, he's the primary backup.
The one other horse I wanted to mention, and one I would use in verticals, particularly if he's the morning line or more, which I actually think he will be, is the 5-horse Kapuna. He's a horse who jumped up big time in his speed figures. He had looked good. He had broke his maiden by 5 lengths at Oaklawn. He had been running 90 type speed figures, and he jumped way up to a 109. It seems like an iffy jump. I remember that speed figure was a little, I kind of had to go back and make sure, but so far it seems okay. The 4th place finisher came back, matched his speed figure, and the horse that beat him that day was a horse, Cyberknife, who frankly I was a little surprised he's not in this field. He was a horse who had always shown a lot of talent, but was a bit goofy in his races and seemed to put it all together that day for Brad Cox. But I thought Kapuna ran really good, and I think the improvement is probably legitimate. I don't think he's good enough to beat Epicenter in here, but I could see him getting into the exactas and trifectas if he matches that last race.
Yeah, I agree. I'll be interested to see how that last race comes back with some runbacks. Cyberknife is the one that I think most people are anticipating coming back out of it, but Kapuna, based on the last speed figure, he's not totally out of it. I didn't necessarily like him in this race, but I am interested to see how that race does with horses that are running back out of it. Well, Craig, we agreed a lot in this sequence. I think typically this is the point where we'd go back and recap and kind of put together a ticket for people. But I've got to say, I'm unlikely to play this sequence, so I'm almost reluctant to give out a ticket because I just don't have enough clever opinions throughout to make it feel like I'm saying anything that's worth putting together, that's worth playing in this sequence. So hopefully the opinions that we put forth are helpful to people that do want to play around with some long shots and potentially make a ticket that can pay better than just all favorites. But for me, that wasn't how I saw it.
Yeah, same here. If this thing were to pay a lot, I wouldn't have it. I can tell you that now. So I have no problem not playing it. The one race I'm looking forward to most would be the Muniz Memorial. I do like 2 Emmys in here. I like Santine, and I don't like the favorites as much. And I think maybe the public will get confused by that last race at the fairgrounds, the Fairground Stakes, where the course was definitely more on the yielding side. So I'm going to stick with 2 Emmys, try to make some money, Santine. But yeah, as far as the other races, it just looks like a lot of chalk to me and ones that I'm not all that interested in.
Well, good luck to you, listeners, if you're going to be playing this sequence on Saturday at the fairgrounds. I hope there are some upsets, so it pays a little bit better. But that's just not the way that Craig and I saw it this week. Craig, as I said at the top of the show, we'll each be taking some time off. I'm on vacation for the next week, and you'll be away a little bit. So as I kind of was saying towards the beginning of this podcast, there will be no TimeformUS podcast for the next 3 episodes that we typically would record. So the next week and a half thereabouts, we'll return with a TimeformUS Forecast before the weekend of April 9th when they run, I believe, the Wood Memorial and one other Kentucky Derby prep, I think the Bluegrass at Keeneland. So we'll record a sequence or a handicapping one of those sequences. But until then, we'll be off for the next few weeks. Craig, as you said, you'll probably tweet out some speed figures, but you'll have to miss hearing our voices for about a week and a half.
Yeah, and I'll actually be at the Florida Derby, so I'm sure I'll talk plenty about that. That's the only horse racing I'm going to do on my vacation, but yeah, I'm going to be in Fort Lauderdale for the week, so we are going to make the trip. I've actually never been to Gulfstream Park. I've probably been to more than 100 racetracks in my life around the world, but never to Gulfstream, which is kind of weird, I guess. I've also never been to Keeneland, believe it or not, and I plan to remedy that one pretty soon. But yeah, looking forward to vacation. Sorry we won't be able to do the show, but sometimes people maybe they need a break from us too.
Yeah, I'll actually be at Keeneland next week, though not for racing, just for a different kind of race, actually, not for horse racing. But yeah, I'll be taking a brief trip to Kentucky next week. But yeah, that's where I'll be. But yeah, we'll be back doing our typical work in about 10, 11 days' time. Everybody, thanks for listening to the podcast this week. Remember, you can always catch these podcasts on DRF.com, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. Just make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel. Thanks for tuning in, and make sure to catch the return of the TimeformUS podcast in about a week and a half.